And welcome to episode 482 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Grace Winburn.
Michael O'Malley.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about movies that we saw this week in part one. And in part two, we will be kicking off our journalism in film series with 1976's All the President's Men. And this is a nice, special, fun series because I get to go and do journalism all day and then come home and talk about journalism here too. It's an all-consuming series for me.
Eat, sleep, breathe.
It's a method podcasting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I tried to burn a few cigarettes in the newsroom today. I had my button-down shirt. I was walking around. I tried to shout across the newsroom. I tried to knock on doors and get them shut in my face. I just tried to do that today to kind of get into the spirit of All the President's Men.
Did anyone tell you probably the most commonly uttered line in this movie? I can't talk about that right now.
Yeah. Not today.
You're not really a journalist.
Not today, but a couple days ago, actually. Yeah. Yeah. I said follow the money a week ago. So that's
And here you are at the podcast.
Were you chasing a dollar? Was it getting blown away by the wind?
I think I was complaining about the DNC. It was just in politics. It was just all the money. That's how you determine how people feel about other people in politics. Anyway, we'll get to that in part two. But let's go ahead and kick off part one. This series of these movies by this director. Let me see if is it Youssef Chahine? Youssef Chahine?
That is probably how I would have said it. Okay. But
the Egyptian film director. A number of his movies were put on Criterion Channel this past month, including what I think is probably his most well-known. It's the one that people kind of point to in terms of his filmography, and that's 1958's Cairo Station. Cairo Station, you follow Kinawi, a physically challenged peddler who makes his living selling newspapers. Oh God, they're just following us today. It's just all about newspapers.
Another journalism movie.
In the central Cairo train station, he is obsessed with Hanoma, an attractive young woman who sells drinks. While she jokes with him about a possible relationship, she is actually in love with Abu Siri, a strong and respected porter at the station who is struggling to unionize his fellow workers to combat their boss's exploitative and abusive treatments. So Cairo Station's been on my list for a while. I think I've thrown it out there for some young critics for the last couple of years, just because one, I don't think you hear a lot about Egyptian cinema. And so it was one of those where let's get more African film on on the young critics foreign list. And then two, this is kind of the one that seems like this is a very accessible point to one of the more recognizable directors in that realm. And to be honest, I kind of thought it was going to be. I didn't read anything about it. I read the log line that I just read, but I kind of thought it was going to be characters of the Cairo Station.
I was kind of expecting bicycle thieves or kind of a neo-realist sort of thing,
and just kind of you almost kind of a little window into all of these different lives and all of these different situations, almost kind of a do the right thing kind of scenario where it's just this one central thing is happening, but then you have all of these different characters who are all kind of contributing to that. I thought that was what it was going to be. That is not what this is. This is
not at all.
This is a neo-realist movie that then turns into a Hitchcock thriller.
And the Jimmy Stewart Hitchcock thrillers, not just any Hitchcock thriller.
Yeah, it's almost like if you were let's do Rear Window, but let's be the Raymond Burr character. let's like that. Let's make him the main character. I don't know. I say that is not a criticism. This movie is kind of
Oh,
crazy. It's nuts.
very entertaining.
I liked it a lot. Yeah. And so like I don't like, the log line doesn't really do a lot of justice to it. So you have Hanuma, who is like a part of this group of women who are not supposed to be selling drinks, but like are like jumping on trains and like trying to sell drinks to different people and like make a few coins, and they're like running off because like police are like trying to run them out of the station, but they never have like firm evidence that they're selling the drinks, and so they can't like lock them up or anything. And then you have Konawi, who he who's just kind of like half like observing it all, but clearly has like this voyeuristic, like not even like kind of look, but like just obsession with not only her but just like women.
The reveal for this is great because, like, at the beginning of the movie, I can't remember what the other guy's name is, but like he takes like pity on the guy and gives
the
him like
newspaper
a
stand owner.
yeah, and so he like gives him a place to live, and then like you cut to like the guys walking into the room that he's given him to live in, like plastered across the walls are just like cutouts of women everywhere.
That he's like pulled out of the newspaper and like magazines just like pinned up on all the walls. Um, you also have the Abu Siri character who has like this kind of side plot that takes a while to come to fruition, but then becomes very like the kind of driving story for a lot of the second act heading into the third act, which is he works as a peddler or a porter, excuse me, works as a porter, and pretty much he and his other workers are like loading and unloading the different trains, and he's working to try to unionize them. As you have this owner who is just like sitting by, just kind of like, nah, like you do that, everything's going to shit. You can't do that. You're gonna ruin everything. If you do that, we're all losing a job and all. He's
Classic owner.
Yeah, he's kind of like, it's kind of like they just gave him a sheet of like this is what a stereotypical owner trying to stave off unionization would say, and he kind of just sputters all that out at various points. Um, but I think Shahini does like a really good job of like bouncing between these different characters. Like I do think it takes a little bit of time to kind of get a sense of, to give everybody kind of their own characterization. You start out and like you meet Kanawi early on, and like you said, like he kind of is picked up, and then they talk about giving him a home, and then he has all the women around his apartment, and then it like hits you with titles. It's like Cairo Station, and then he kind of has various little points where he's kind of almost poking his head up as the different characters are being introduced. But then you have so many different characters that are being introduced. You're trying to kind of get a sense of who all is important in this station. Um, and like the shift from kind of this more neorealist look at this working train station in Cairo, Egypt, to like this thriller about this man who's so like obsessed with women, but also the specific woman that he's just like, I love her so much, I have to kill her. Um, is like the way it twists is not like it's not, doesn't just like turn a heel at one point. It's just like after time you're just like, wait, hold on, is this dude a murderer?
Yeah, it's a real like frog like burning or boiling in the slowly heating up water kind of moment.
And that's what I kind of liked about it. Like it's not like you had like this moment where it just kind of like turned on its heel and just became a different movie. It just kind of like slowly merged from one type of movie into another type of movie. And when you get into the second type of movie, you're just like, holy shit, this is crazy. And like it developed, and because it just did that slowly, you develop like this real fear for for specifically the Hanuma character who's being stalked by this man, but also just like all the characters kind of involved at the station who over time you've gotten to know. Like there's this real peril to them once you get to that third act, and like he's hunting people. But yeah, I was a big fan of this. Michael, what did you think of the movie?
I really liked it too. I feel out of my depth. There's like obvious political subtext to this movie, and I feel out of my depth in like parsing it beyond like the really broad, like, you know, there's the unionization, there's like a feminist rally later in the movie, and I understand what those mean in really broad sense, that like, you know, anyone who's aware of these, you know, movements kind of understands. But I do feel like that, like one of the things that I sometimes run into when I'm like, I haven't seen any cinema from this country, I'm gonna like watch something from this country, is I sometimes feel like I'm jumping in um and getting movies I enjoy, but also movies that I feel like there's probably a lot more going on here subtextually that I would pick up on if I like knew anything about like the historical or political context. I mean, this movie is quite accessible. Um, and I like it for all the reasons that you already mentioned, Zach. But I do feel like it probably has some kind of interesting things to say about like Egyptian politics at the time. And in fact, like I mean, this is an Egyptian movie, but it came out of the United Arab Republic, which is like a really short-lived little like union between Egypt and is it in Syria, right? And I only found out about this from looking at the Wikipedia page, but this was submitted to the Academy Awards, but not accepted to the Academy Awards as like a best foreign language nomination. And I don't know why that is. And I'm curious if there's like a kind of political reason for it. Is the, you know, anyway, good movie. I'm looking forward to watching more of this director's films because there are like a dozen of them programmed on Criterion right now. But I also feel like I would like to read up on some of the historical moment and then return to this movie and see if it kind of yields more.
Yeah. I was trying to look up it to see what was going on with the United Arab Republic to add to your point. But yeah. But no, it has like I'm excited to kind of maybe explore some more of Chihini's movies that are on Criterion Channel.
Yeah. Good for Criterion, because I think you know, streaming is like it should be a really great way to have distribution of films that otherwise don't really make that much of an impact in like, you know, the English speaking world. But, you know, I don't know how much that actually happens with like your like Maxes or Hulus or whatever. So like good on Criterion for doing this.
Yeah, I mean, like one of the reasons that, you know, like this was one of the movies I targeted for, at least whenever we were suggesting stuff for young critics, is like, yeah, you don't see a lot of you know, outside of, you know, at least more broadly, like African cinema that's like accessible, that people can kind of, I think that, you know, one of the things, it's at least to me, when we're kind of coming up with the young critics list and we're trying to find foreign films, it's a lot of you know, France and you know, France and Germany and Japan, and you know, we kind of have like some usual suspects who have like become much more accessible to audiences in terms of like, you know, when you look at foreign cinema, a lot of those titles come up. And so a lot of African film, there's like this rich history of like African film, and it feels like one, like it's not super accessible, so people can't really tap into it. But then two, there's just not, you know, there should be more things like what Criterion's doing to like allow people to kind of find it on their own. Because, you know, Grace talked a couple weeks ago about or last week about Nightingale's Prayer, and like that seems like a incredibly cool movie that nobody can see.
Yeah, and there's that kind of like a self-fulfilling prophecy about like the kind of stodginess of the film canon, you know. If the films that get distributed are the films that are widely recognized as masterpieces in the English-speaking world, then the English-speaking world is only going to recognize masterpieces that are, you know, recognized in the English-speaking world. So yeah, cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is just another call from Grace to say, release the Nightingale's Prayer so people can watch it.
Please, God. Criterion, justice for Nightingale's Prayer when? because I mean, like it definitely has the appeal. This is so these are two kind of gendered, one like the romantic melodrama and one, would you call it, like the incel thriller, you know, perfect for
It is
guys.
100% incel thriller.
It'd be amazing, you know. So
Yeah. Yeah. No, if you have Criterion Channel, check out Cairo Station. It's nuts. It's a wild time. Well, cool. I'm going to talk about. So last week, I caught for the first time Martin Scorsese's 1986 film, The Color of Money. Or like, let's just let Paul Newman and Tom Cruise like duke it out in movie star, just machismo excellence. Real guys movie, The Color of Money. For those people who are unfamiliar, this is like a spiritual sequel to The Hustler, with Paul Newman playing Fast Eddie Felson. And so in this one, it catches up with Fast Eddie. He decides to return to the game of pool. He's been in the world of whiskey, making money. But he wants to return to the game and take on a pupil when and he chooses to do this when he finds the talented Vincent Loria, played by Tom Cruise, and they proceed to start Vincent and Eddie and what is Vincent's girlfriend's name, Carmen. They start touring these pool halls, trying to, Eddie's trying to teach Vincent how to scam, but Vincent, grows frustrated because Vince is showboating. He's always getting, he's not really understanding why, like, he needs to take falls and things like that. He just wants to, be the best and let everybody know that he's the best. And so Eddie gets frustrated with him, and they have a falling out. But then Eddie takes up playing again, and they get into this like, World Series of Poker esque tournament of
World Series of
pool.
Poker of Pool.
Yeah, pretty much. It's honestly great because it's just like what feels like a back, like the back of a convention center in Las Vegas, with all of just these men, these like little bit overweight men who are all smoking and drinking constantly. They're all named Sal, and they're all just playing poker. Like there's like the one guy that like Eddie, spoiler alert, that Eddie loses to like in the tournament. He like has like a red bandana on, and like if I remember correctly, almost has like 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 a karate outfit on, like, or something on. Like he's just a wild looking person. What, like, who is this man that is just walking the earth playing pool? But yeah, so this is kind of this is in that Scorsese period. He's making this. He's making After Hours. He's trying to make some money so he can get Last Temptation of Christ up and away. Which thank God he did, because movie slaps. I would reference the Cinematary podcast episode, but I forgot what number that episode is. But check it out. But really, really you're watching this movie less for the story, less for the pool. Well, actually, you're a little bit for the pool, because when they're playing pool, it's pretty fun. That's when it's fun. The other stuff is pretty boring. But honestly, like, this is, you got Scorsese, but you also have like, you got Paul Newman and Tom Cruise, and I think you can kind of make some parallels between the old aging movie star and the young up and coming movie star, and kind of like this butting heads. I think that you kind of have, like, to me, when I'm like watching the movie, like in terms of like the old versus new, that stood out to me is like, it's less about like, because the frustrating thing about Vincent, the Tom Cruise character, is, like, if you watch, I need to rewatch The Hustler. It's been like a very long time since I've watched The Hustler. It's probably been like 10, 12 years. But like the Tom Cruise character in this, he's just very, like, he has no interest in like the art of the scam. He's not. Eddie's all about like this kind of artistry of, I mean, let's start here, because if we start too big, then this guy um won't give us the time, and that guy has the most money, so we got to kind of play decent, maybe lose a few over here, and then we can go to the big fish over there, and that's when we start making the real money. And it's kind of like this, almost like trying to stay 2-3 steps ahead on things. And Vincent is just like, no, screw all that, I'm just gonna beat the shit out of everybody, and then when I beat the shit out of everybody, then I'll win all the money. And like there's like that frustration between Eddie and Vincent there, is that he's just like, no, you're not like finessing your ability. And it seems like Vincent also doesn't have the ability to finesse his game. It's like he's kind of like, listen, dude, I'm gonna go 150% on everything. Like I don't have, like, he just doesn't have it in him to like take falls. Whenever they have a couple instances. The first one is Eddie and Carmen. They do like this play where Eddie starts like, they disassociate themselves with Vincent. Vincent goes in first and is like kind of drawing some attention, and then Eddie and Carmen come in later, and Eddie is like kind of making a show, like he and Carmen are like kind of necking on each other, kind of getting close, like drawing attention over, and then and then they kind of start this big argument with Vincent and another pool player, leading to somebody taking the bait of like really like upping the bets, where Tom Cruise they're going to win this big cash prize because they're getting people to kind of sucker into this bet. And they get out of it, they pull it off, they're in the alleyway, and Tom Cruise wants to fight Paul Newman, because he's just like, you were getting too close to my girl, it's becoming too realistic, you want to be with my girl, you just want me out. And they're like, what the fuck are you talking about? No, we're trying to con these people out of thousands of dollars, that we're not, I don't give a shit about her, like, what are you talking about? This is acting. And another time where Tom Cruise just wants to just beat the guy who's like number one in the world, and he finally takes the fall because his girlfriend is just like, I'm not gonna have sex with you if you win this game. And he's just like, gotcha.
Dang. The only thing more important than pool.
Banging your girlfriend, according to Tom Cruise.
It is funny, like, it's been a couple years since I saw that movie, but the way that you're describing the Tom Cruise character could be a lot of Tom Cruise characters. This Top
He's
Gun,
not far. He's not far off from like Top Gun.
Yeah.
But the interesting, and so, like, yeah, like, so I saw it as that. Like, we were talking after we saw the movie, and it's like, oh, this is like a, old Hollywood, new Hollywood. Oh, this is like Paul Newman teaching Tom Cruise how to act. Oh, this is like, kind of a passing of the torch. But it also is just kind of like a rumination on like, it doesn't really matter like when the person was born, but just kind of a difference in generations of like, Paul Newman coming up in like the 50s and 60s as like a movie star. Like there was just kind of this way of this is how you act, this is how you're a star, compared to Tom Cruise coming up in the 80s. 80s and 90s, and it very much like has this different way of like, yeah, it's not the studio, it's not kind of that tail end of the studio system anymore. It's about who's getting on the magazine covers, who's getting TV bumps, stuff like that. And it's almost just kind of like this, like they're both accomplishing the same thing, but it's also just kind of two different eras of like, and I think that's kind of the conclusion it comes to, is it's one is not more right than the other. At the end of the day, all they're wanting to do is like play pool and beat each other. But yeah, I don't know. The movie, it has like a lot of these like fun, like, oh yeah, dudes rock, this is great, they're playing pool, this looks fun. But then you have all of these other scenes, and you kind of just get slowed down with like, you kind of get a lot of momentum with like the pool, and then pulling off the scams and stuff like that, and that's fun. But then you get slowed down because it's just like you start, and then Vincent and Eddie get in a fight, and then start, and then Vincent and Eddie get in a fight. It's just like this old bickering married couple who just can't get along. and just need to make up and start a life together. But I don't know, it's okay. I thought it was fine. I'm glad the real takeaway I had from this is that I'm glad that Martin Scorsese got the money he needed to to make The Last Temptation of Christ,
It's
which
probably his worst movie of the '80s. Looking at it, like, I'm glad it made money, but he's got Raging Bull, King of Comedy, After Hours, then Color Money, then Last Temptation. It's like Color Money really stands out as like the one where he was kind of resting on his laurels a bit.
yeah, Raging Bull, King of Comedy. Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say it's the weakest of all of them. We were talking about it. And I'm like, After Hours is fantastic.
It's awesome. Even though that was another one where he was like, I guess
That's
I
a
got to
money
do this
grab,
movie
too.
for money, but
Yeah.
he poured himself into that movie. Gosh.
Yeah, the movie. That's kind of the thing with Color of Money. It's just like there's like there's Scorsese touches to it because you got him and Thelma Schoonmaker. Like it's just like they're the best. Like so, of course, it's gonna have great moments where like just the way, just the kind of the subtle ways it's directed, the way he places the camera, the way he kind of like captures Cruz or captures Newman, is fantastic. She cuts it just better than anybody else. But at the same time, there's just kind of like this. It feels like he's not throwing his heater. He's not throwing it 98. He's throwing it like 90.
All
It's
you need
like
to know, all you need to know is the soundtrack has 0 Rolling Stones tracks, 1 Eric Clapton track, 1 Mark Knopfler track,
he's
1
like I
Don
don't.
Henley track.
He's like I don't have it in me. Yeah.
No.
But no, Color of Money. If you're a completionist of like Scorsese, maybe watch it. I don't know. I don't know if I'm like clamoring to get that second viewing of Color of Money. It's kind of I think we're going to talk about a way more fun, at least in my opinion, a way more fun Dudes Rock movie in part 2 than this one.
Yeah.
But all right, let's speaking of dudes who rocked, but maybe they don't rock solo. Michael, you got you got the it's Ethan Cohen, right?
It's Ethan Cohen and his wife. So I watched Drive Away Dolls, is what Zach's building to.
I'm trying
Which
to.
so the Cohen brothers are the Cohen estranged brothers, it seems, at the moment.
I think they're getting together again, though. I think
They
I saw
better.
something.
So Joel Cohen a few years ago had the Macbeth movie, which I thought was good. But it was not like it probably was not going to be like a top tier. Like if I were ranking it connected to the Joel and Ethan Cohen brothers movies, it was not going to rank super high. And then I watched Drive Away Dolls, which came out earlier this year, directed by Ethan Cohen and co-written by Ethan Cohen and his wife Trisha Cook. And I guess Trisha also edited the movie, which I'm only just now seeing as I'm scanning the top of the Wikipedia page. But anyway, this is I've seen a lot of people joke on this. This is a really easy point to make, but it's like funny to compare this to Macbeth because like Macbeth feels like certain Coen Brothers movies, like the big, like portentous, like serious aspects of the Coen Brothers movies, things you might see in like No Country for Old Men or those sorts of things. And then this is like feels like everything else, like the Raising Arizona and the like Oh Brother Art Thou, like the kind of goofy broad like crime caper with like a bunch of funny accents and like a bunch of like criminals making soliloquies, and it's funny that like it's funny to imagine that like Joel Cohen was exclusively the serious one, and Ethan Cohen was the goofy caper guy. And maybe that's not the case, that it's like that clean of a break between them, but it is funny that if you like smash these two movies together, Macbeth and Drive Away Dolls, you get like an actual Coen Brothers movie that we would recognize. But anyway, so this stars let's see. Well, it's got Margaret Qualley in it, and Geraldine Viswanathan, who I don't think I had seen before, but she's awesome in this movie. And basically, these are like best friends. They're both lesbians, and basically, Margaret Qualley's character like really tanks the current relationship she's in, so much so that she's got to like leave the city. They live in Philadelphia, and they get what's called a drive away to go down to Florida, to Tallahassee. And the drive away, which I didn't know until I watched this, is like basically it kind of sounds like the Uberization of like a trucker or something like that. Like someone wants to get a freight to a location and supplies you with a vehicle, and you're just the driver. And so they walk in and they're like, we want to drive away to Tallahassee. And the guy has literally just gotten off the phone with like what seems like some like crime boss or whatever. He's like, we're sending our people in to take our freight to Tallahassee. And so this guy at the drive-away store mistakenly thinks, oh, these are the people from the crime boss. And so he gives them the car that has like all the, mob money and stuff in it. And then like they leave, and then like 2 minutes later, the mob people come in and they're like, "Where's the car?" And they're like, "I thought we just gave it." It's like that sort of thing. And so they gotta drive down to Tallahassee. They don't realize that they're in trouble, but all of a sudden, they're starting to be pursued and blah blah blah. It's a good concept, and there's some fun parts in it. But I gotta say, I didn't love this movie overall. Like it feels like an assembly of entertaining scenes that don't like cohere into a film. It's the crime element's fine. It's fun. It's got a lot of like, it kind of feels like a little bit like Raising Arizona, a little bit like oh my gosh, how am I forgetting the name of this? The surveillance one. Burn After Reading.
Burn After Reading?
It feels a little bit like Burn After Reading, except that instead of the government like coming after people, it's like the mob, and this like crime.
The
syndicate.
Russians?
But there's a political angle eventually. Matt Damon appears in this movie as this very conservative, like family values politician running for Senate. Or no, he's a senator running for maybe governor or something, or maybe he's just running for re-election in Florida, and he's connected to the mob. And the like payoff to what is actually in this car besides money is like very funny. And it has to do with Matt Damon, and I won't spoil it. But Matt Damon, I think it's the best scene, which is when he tries to come and get the stuff that was in the car that he can't let get public because he's running for office on this family values platform.
I want to make there should be like a series. This would be a great Criterion like package of movies that Matt Damon just pops up in.
Hit like this and Interstellar and
Interstellar. I'm trying to think. There's a bunch of Soderbergh movies like Che. He shows up in like part 2 of Che, and you're like, what the fuck is Matt Damon doing? And it completely takes you out of the movie for like 10 minutes because you're just like you're in like the jungles of like Venezuela or Colombia or
Bolivia or something.
Yeah. Bolivia, yeah. And then fucking Matt Damon's there with the CIA.
Yeah. Well, so he's connected with the CIA probably because he's a senator. And anyway, I've been saying things that are fun about this movie. I mean, the accents are fun for the most part. There's one of the like mob guys chasing the girls is played by let's see, Joey Slotnick, who I kind of recognize as like a character actor. I couldn't have pulled his name out, but he's really funny as a kind of like, that Coen brothers, like, I'm just spouting poetry about like my crime ways, and like he's kind of like the nice mob guy compared to like his kind of more oafish and like more violently prone partner. And so he's always like talking him down in really entertaining ways. And so that's good. But like, I think a lot of this movie is dedicated to like the friendship between the two girls. So like Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan. And I just don't think that really works. Like I said, like Geraldine's really good, and she's kind of like the straight-laced one, whereas Margaret Qualley is supposed to be this like hedonistic, like anything goes sort of person who's like always getting laid, and
so just any Margaret Qualley character.
Yeah, I'm not convinced on Margaret Qualley. Like I think she's bad in this movie. Like the accent is really bad, I think. All the other accents are very funny, but she sounds a lot like George Clooney in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, which is great. Like George Clooney is great, but the way that she's doing it, it's just like slightly off, and I just can't place it. It just like the moment she started talking, I was like, this isn't right. And I guess it just feels like she just seems like she's trying too hard and getting kind of mundane results out of it. Um, Whereas like what this character needs is like an actor who feels like so completely like embodied in the role that it feels like kind of tossed off, even though it's obviously like a very like belabored performance. Like again, like George Clooney is really good in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, doing like basically the same sort of like, oh, I'm the kind of fast talking loose one. Um, and my friends here are always, getting into trouble, but I'm gonna, you know, through my kind of like huckster ways get out of it, or maybe get us deeper into trouble depending on the scene.
I
And I
think
don't know,
I'm the only one here unaffiliated.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff like that that should be funny, and I just think it doesn't land in this movie, not just because of Margaret Qualley, but also because like the writing is really loose. Like some of this is really good, like some of the lines are really funny, but a lot of it like struggles. I think it feels like a first draft, and or like a facsimile of like that sort of like really like just very smooth, refined like dialogue you're used to in like one of these kind of other Coen Brothers movies. And this one just feels really shaggy and rough around the edges, like sometimes by design. Like, you want these kinds of movies to feel like loose and like anything can happen. But at times this movie just feels like it's spinning its wheels, and like especially when it tries to make a more serious connection between the two leads, I think it really flubs that. Like I don't buy it. Like at first Margaret Qualley is kind of like almost bullying uh the other girl, like because the other girl is like really uptight, and there's the kind of classic like odd couple situation where she's trying to get her to come out of her shell and all that, and that's fine. But then she's like, I don't know, like maybe I again like I it just doesn't work for me. I mean, caveat being that like I'm a straight guy here, and so maybe the dynamics of like a lesbian relationship would be different. But like at one point, like Margaret Qualley's just like, I think you should sleep with me, and like will not relent about this the entire movie until finally, like that is like supposed to be like a opening up moment when her friend finally is like, yeah, we're gonna sleep together, and like have this like kind of like I'm having my like this like sexual awakening or whatever. It's just I don't know. It doesn't land emotionally for me, especially in a movie that's as goofy as it is. And so there's just a lot of this movie that feels like it's is broken in ways, and that's too bad because like one of the defining features of like Joel and Ethan together working on a movie is like most of their movies feel like clockwork in the sense of like even the weird stuff, like even something like Hail Caesar or like a Burn After Reading, the ones that are kind of like not people's like go to, are great because they feel so incredibly like thought through. And this movie doesn't feel that way. It feels like someone who really likes those movies is wanting to try to do it on their own and has not refined it enough. And I don't know. That's kind of a bummer. I was expecting to like this more than I did. Um, but I didn't really buy the character arcs. The scenes are funny, but they don't really fit together well. I don't know. Disappointing. Joel, Ethan, y'all
Gotta
gotta
make it,
y'all
man.
gotta make up, have a have some family counseling or something, and,
Yeah,
and make movies
yeah.
together again.
Have like a little like
Work it out on the
intervention.
remix.
Yeah, you get like George Clooney and John Turturro and Stephen Root and um yeah, all those guys get together and they're just like, Joel, Ethan, we got to work it out. We got to make good movies again.
There are some really good performances in this movie, though. Like I don't want to be too negative on it because I didn't like the whole package. Like there's like redeemable elements in it. Except for Margaret Qualley, the performance is really good. There's this guy named Curly, played by Bill Camp, who's really really a scene stealer. I feel like, but yeah. So maybe Miley Cyrus pops up in this unbelievably, and she's there and interesting in her role. So
Yeah.
maybe when the Coen Bros get back together, they can make another movie with this cast minus Margaret. Sorry.
Ooh. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be back in part 2 talking All the President's Men after this. And we're back with part 2 of episode 482 of Cinematary. In this part, we're going to be kicking off our journalism and film series with 1976's All the President's Men, directed by Alan Pakula. Pakula? Is it Pakula? How do you say that?
I
Real
think
quick.
Pakulia.
Pakulia? Pakulia?
Pakulia.
All right.
He's a Pakulia guy.
He's a Pakulia guy. That's how I'm going to remember it. He's a
Yeah.
Pakulia guy.
Yeah.
From a script by William Goldman. The film stars Robert Redford, Dustin Hoffman, Jason Robards, Hal Holbrook, and Jack Warden. Two green reporters and rivals working for the Washington Post, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, researched the botched 1972 burglary of the Democratic Party headquarters at the Watergate apartment complex. With the help of a mysterious source, codenamed Deep Throat, the two reporters make a connection between the burglars and a White House staffer. Despite dire warnings about their safety, the duo follows the money all the way to the top. Unlike the book, the film covers only the first 7 months of the Watergate scandal, from the time of the break-in to Nixon's second inauguration on January 20th, 1973. The film introduced the catchphrase "follow the money" in relation to the case, which does not appear in the book nor in any Watergate documentation. Redford began asking about the Watergate break-in while promoting The Candidate. Then read Woodward and Bernstein's Watergate stories in the Washington Post while waiting to start filming The Way We Were. Redford first spoke with Woodward in November 1972 after the reporter's well-publicized mistake about Hugh Sloan implicating Haldeman in his testimony to the Watergate grand jury. Said Redford, quote, "People who take wild shots and miss interest me." Redford hired William Goldman to write the script in 1974. Goldman has said that Woodward was extremely helpful to him, but that Bernstein was not. Goldman wrote that his crucial decision regarding the screenplay structure was to discard the second half of the book. After he delivered his first draft in August 1974, Warner Brothers agreed to finance the film. Redford was not happy with Goldman's first draft. Woodward and Bernstein read it and also did not like it. Redford asked for their suggestions, but Bernstein and his girlfriend, writer Nora Ephron, wrote their own draft. Redford showed the draft to Goldman, suggesting that it might contain some material he could integrate, but Goldman later called Redford's acceptance of the Bernstein-Ephron draft a, quote, gutless betrayal. Redford later expressed dissatisfaction with the Bernstein-Ephron draft, saying, quote, a lot of it was sophomoric and way off the beat. According to Goldman, quote, in what they wrote, Bernstein was sure catnip to the ladies. He also said that one of Bernstein and Ephron's scenes was included in the final film, a bit in which Bernstein delivers a secretary in an attempt to see someone, which was not factually true. A news item in a February 1980 Los Angeles magazine mentioned a recent story in the LA Times which revealed that All the President's Men was written at Redford's suggestion, although his name does not appear among the book's acknowledgments. However, the item noted that Redford's involvement was mentioned in the book Portrait of All the President's Men by Jack Hirschberg. Several actors were considered to play Ben Bradley. Among them were Richard Widmark, Henry Fonda, Kirk Douglas, and Gregory Peck. Joyce Haber's column in the April 30th, 1975 LA Times reported that Jason Robards had been cast as Bradley, in part because Lee Marvin was unavailable. Robards was always Redford's choice to play Bradley. However, Bradley had recommended George C. Scott for the role, and he was somewhat unimpressed when Robards visited the post offices to develop a feel for the newsroom. In advance of the shoot, Bradley told Robards, quote, just don't make me look like an asshole. Under consideration for the role of publisher Katharine Graham were Patricia Neal, Alexis Smith, and Dorothy McGuire. However, no portrayal of Graham appeared in the film. Redford and Hoffman spent several weeks in the company of Woodward and Bernstein, respectively, and also observed the workings of the Washington Post newsroom, according to the Washington Post. In the absence of Woodward and Bernstein, who were on leave to work on their second book, Redford and Hoffman continued their research with investigative reporters Seymour Hersh and Fred Barbash, respectively. Director Alan Pakula interviewed several Post editors and reporters as well. Redford and Hoffman divided top billing of the movie, with Redford billed above Hoffman in the posters and trailers, and Hoffman billed above Redford in the film itself. And this was precisely the same manner in which James Stewart and John Wayne had divided top billing for John Ford's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance in 1962. New York Times.
Another newspaper movie, if you think about it.
Another newspaper movie, it is.
Mm-hmm.
Print the legend. The New York Times in 1976 said, "All the President's Men is such a model of efficient filmmaking that nothing that Alan Pakula has heretofore directed or that William Goldman has written could have prepared us for the success of this picture. All the President's Men is as remarkable for its understatement, for the cliches it avoids, for all of the things it doesn't do, as for the things that it does do." Roger Ebert in 1976 said, "All the President's Men is truer to the craft of journalism than to the art of storytelling, and that's its problem. The movie is as accurate about the processes used by investigative reporters as we have any right to expect, and yet process finally overwhelms narrative. We're adrift in a sea of names, dates, telephone numbers, coincidences, lucky breaks, false leads, dogged footwork, denials, evasions, and sometimes even the truth. Just such thousands of details led up to Watergate and the Nixon resignation. Yes, but the movie's more about the details than about their results." And as far as I could find, the Washington Post did not review the movie in 1976.
Ooh, man, what a missed opportunity.
It seems, yeah, that would have been kind of fun, but probably for the best. And with that, All the President's Men. Was this anybody's first time seeing this, or had everybody seen this before?
This was my first.
Oh wow!
Oh,
yeah.
All right, let's start with you. What did you think of the movie?
Like I said, this was my first watch. And as I told you guys during the break, I'll share with all of our listeners. I reached out to my mother. She has a 35-year career experience as a journalist. She's reported on politics in the newsroom. An absolute dynamo to me. And so she fits so well into this world that I asked her opinion on this movie. And she sort of gave me the rundown that this movie really inspired a whole new generation of journalists and presented journalism less as a job and more as a calling. It's sort of this like rallying cry to these spirited young people that wanted to go out and change the world, save the world as storytellers. And so I took that, and then I sit down to watch it, expecting to be so blown away by this fantastic portrayal of journalists on the case, and I wasn't so inspired by it. I mean, it did a really good job not glamorizing the profession, as it really dug into the hard legwork, like what it really takes to put together a story of this scope and size. It doesn't just fall into place. And I admired that. I like that, it really took its time. You feel the pressure and the deadlines, creeping in, but you're always working towards something. And it was almost exhausting at a certain point. But there was so much that I liked about it. I just didn't want to pick up a pad and pen and suddenly ask anybody anything why. So
you didn't want to just like start questioning people?
Well, no, but I did. I was like begging for the opportunity for Robert Redford to like knock on my door, and I was just going to tell him anything that he wanted.
Right.
I would libel myself like crazy. Anything you want to hear.
I think that's underappreciated in Woodward and Bernstein's investigative journalism abilities, is being fucking hot.
Oh, I know. Well, I don't think that they were. I think that that's like really, it's like, yeah, it's really true to the profession. This like, like knocking on doors, pounding the pavement, but also their movie star handsome Robert Redford. And
it's like that's, you're like, there's so many unbelievable elements. Like, well, yeah, the number one is that
they're
But,
hot.
Bob Woodward looks like fucking Robert Redford in 1976.
Yeah,
he's
like what do you
beautiful.
mean you don't want to immediately talk to him? Like he's so charming and
I was thinking
affable.
about that in like the scene when Bernstein goes and talks to the bookkeeper first and like gets information, and they
Yeah.
go back and he brings Woodward with him that time. It seems like she opens up a lot more
Yeah.
when Robert Redford's there than Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, it should have been Robert Redford on that date with that White House staffer and not
For real.
Dustin Hoffman. Like you guys
For
quit
real.
trying to make Dustin Hoffman like the like total hottie in this, like what you said earlier about the Efron and Bernstein script with like Bernstein being catnip to women. I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, it's
It's got that raw animal magnetism.
I was like, whoa.
Yeah, you're just like, how did they get him to talk? How did they not get him not to talk?
I couldn't shut up.
Looking at those eyes, like Jesus.
Well,
Michael,
and it did do a good job of like it painted them as two different kinds of journalists. There's that like easygoing like affability of Robert Redford, where it's like he doesn't like pressure anyone. He's a little more respectful and a little more dealing in the hard truths and the facts. And then Bernstein is kind of an operator. Like, he prides himself on being able to like read in between the lines, but it's like who is it? Harry says, I'm not interested in what's obvious to you because everything is so obvious to Bernstein. He's the only, smartest guy in the room. I'm interested in what you know. And he doesn't really know a whole lot. And that's where Woodward comes in. And so they balance each other really well. And then they fuse and they become Woodstein.
Woodstein. I love it when he calls that out like across the newsroom.
Everybody knows.
Yeah.
Okay.
Michael, how many times have you seen this movie?
This is probably the third time, I think. I love this movie. I think it's so watchable. It does make me want to be a journalist. Like but obviously like this kind of journalism doesn't exist anymore. And even if I like went back in time to like the halcyon days of like, print journalism being like, a thing that made money. Like, I mean, their circumstances are so exceptional that, there's, the magic of movies. Like I don't really like talking to people, like knocking on doors or whatever, but this movie makes me feel like, yeah, that'd be so freaking awesome. There's something really, these kinds of like newspaper movies that are like really heavy on like people sitting in rooms, like flipping papers or like typing on typewriters. It's just like the like soundscapes of these movies. Like, I just love that. The like typewriter sounds and like the scratching of pens and stuff. And because this movie is so sparse in terms of like its like soundtrack or score or that sort of thing, you just get a ton of that throughout this movie. And I mean, I don't know, that everyone would feel this way, but like there's just something very tactile about this movie, and the tactility of it is really attractive to me. Like, it makes me want to inhabit this world, even though I would not like that job. I wouldn't like to break the Watergate scandal. Like, come on.
No, I agree. Like, because I mean, like, you have to use all of your senses when you're like getting the story. So it's like, of course, it's as much as like what you hear and sense and see and everything. I definitely like that sound of the typewriter, the like low murmur of everyone talking constantly, the news on in the background, like
yeah, like radio and TV constantly in the newsroom, which is wild to me. Like, how can you sit there and I don't know, how can you sit there and write when like national news is breaking on the TV? Like, that must be incredibly difficult. But like, I think it's also like, I mean, I'm a person who's knowledgeable enough about myself to know that this is like, more of like a kind of misplaced nostalgia than anything I would really enjoy. But like, there is something about like that kind of like analog media era that I think in contrast to like what we experience now, there's just something really, I don't know, like it's aesthetically pleasing to me. Like the filing cabinets, or you have to like leaf through stuff. Like, I mean, I remember leafing through filing cabinets. I used to work at a law firm where I had to do that all the time, and it's not actually fun. But like the way that this movie aestheticizes it, I don't know. Like I'm really, I just find this movie riveting just on an aesthetic level. and the way that it kind of mythologizes journalism, like, and I mean, like, I know this is real to an extent, but like, you know, the like meeting Deep Throat in the like parking garage, and like there's like inky blackness of the parking garage, except like just the outlines of their faces, like that sort of stuff is like, there's that like wild mythic stuff like connected to like the really mundane stuff of like, we have a legal pad with like terrible handwriting, like pages of terrible handwriting on it that we're like trying to pitch like some sort of story to our boss, and like I just think that like that combination is just really intoxicating for me in this movie. Also, this is not connected at all to what I'm saying, but like Zach, when you said William Goldman, I was like, why does that name sound so familiar? I looked it up, and it's The Princess Bride, William Goldman. And he had just written the novel The Princess Bride in 1973. Like, it's like the thing he did right before he did this movie, which is like an incredibly wild like pivot in your career, is to have like this like comic fantasy novel and then like a hard-nosed political thriller. Anyway, that's just a random aside, but
yeah. You're talking about like the tactility of it, and we'll talk about this movie. This brings in kind of 2 points that both of y'all made. One, we'll talk about Spotlight. That's the third movie of the series.
That's another really like orally interesting movie to me. Like lots of
well, like going back to Grace's point that her mom made about this, like All the President's Men being an inspiration to like a new, a bunch of journalists like at that period of time. Spotlight kind of has that effect. Well, I'll have two. I'm trying to get at least two people from the Observer to come and join, and like they're young people who like they'll talk days about like how Spotlight inspired them, which is another one that I think kind of like brought a lot of attention to people about like the profession, because that's also one that's very tactile. It's a lot of like it's a lot of typing. It's a lot of like it's another one that almost is as obsessed, if not more, with like processes than this movie. But I kind of like those in both respects, and we'll talk about Spotlight in a few weeks. But like the thing I like about having the processes in this movie compared to like something like I think of like another journalism movie, like it's a slapstick, but like His Girl Friday, it's a journalism movie, but like it's also just like absurd in like the
well, they're just shouting the whole time.
They're just shouting the whole time, and like stuff is just kind of falling in their laps, and like this is very it's kind of, that's what's so interesting about how William Goldman writes it and how Alan Bacula shoots it, because like you think of like the first like 30 minutes of this movie, and it's just like Woodward and Bernstein just kind of like toiling away at different things, and like that's what it is. It's like honestly, like most of journalism work is like really boring. it's like leafing through lawsuit documents, and it's leafing through records, and it's like talking to people, and like 9 out of the 10 calls hang up on you, and then the one call gives you nothing, and you like spent 50 minutes on the phone with them, and they didn't tell you any information that was useful. And it's a lot of like calling people, and it's a lot of like, oh, they're not here right now, you have to like reschedule to this time. Okay, like I can talk to them this time. Oh, well, this time actually didn't work for me. It's so much just like mundane processes that it's like I kind of like that they really, really zero hard in on it, like the first 30 minutes, because a lot of this is just like, it's like, you talk about the tactility of it. That I think that's just work, like a lot of like the beginning of the movie, it's just working. It's just like, it's not something that you can kind of access the information or access the people to talk to like really immediately. And I think that's kind of, when people look at the movie and kind of mythologize journalism, it's just kind of like, oh, like this is great. Like I'm gonna, break all these stories and get all, and be able to write this like, sweeping epic of like, this is how the town's corruption is happening. But you're like, yeah, but you have to get like you have to get people to talk, and you have to like find the information, and you have to find sources for the information. And it's just like, it's long, and it's arduous, and it's boring, and it's mundane, and it's a lot of work. And so I like that they're able to grasp that, but they do it in a relatively subtle movie kind of way that makes it like the first 30 minutes is about processes and mundane stuff that they're trying to figure out, but they do it in a very sweeping movie way that's like The way that they cut this movie is very exhilarating.
I think speaking of the shooting, you got to mention Gordon Willis, who was just on an
Yeah,
absolute tear at this point in his career. Um, and I think that this movie just looks like incredible. But
yeah,
also like, you know, it's like recognizably like kind of Hollywood new wave inflected, but like the really famous shot where Robert Redford's on the phone, and it's like an unbroken like 5 minute like phone conversation or something like that, and like he's on one side of the frame, and like the camera is like very very slowly like moving him like across the frame as like stuff's going on like in the background of like there's just some like incredible flexes. There's also the when they're in the library and the camera like
Big
cranes
photos.
up, like just looking straight down until it's like 50 feet in the air or something. There's there's just some incredible like flexes of like filmmaking and like shot composition and cinematography like done in this. Like uh all the like times that they come to people's houses and it looks like it's like 10 o'clock at night because it's like pitch black and no one has any lights on in their house. Uh those could be really murky and awful looking. Um, but they always look really sharp and striking. And yeah, anyway, again, like I just could go on and on about the aesthetics of this movie and like just how rock solid like all of the just basic technical filmmaking is, like
yeah.
regardless of what the content is.
And there's a little bit like again, kind of it's tough to not compare this with like Spotlight. And Spotlight's one. I remember when it won Best Picture, people were just like, "Why?" Like it's not a very showy movie. I watched it actually a couple months ago, and it's honestly it's so incredibly shot, but it's shot in this way that's very like understated and just like smart. It's not like one perfect shot kind of quality. You know, you're not sharing screenshots and like stills from Spotlight. I feel like this one has a little bit more just because yeah, you have Gordon Willis like shooting it on film. He's 2 years removed from Godfather Part Two. He's about to do Annie Hall. Um, like he just kind of goes God mode in a couple shots. You think of like at the end of the movie when Redford's looking for Deep Throat in the parking garage, or you have like the different shots where in the foreground, like the TV's playing and they're like in the background typing. You think of like the Republican National Convention one where they're announcing Nixon as their nomination, and Redford's back in the back typing, or at the end of the movie when Nixon's being inaugurated and they're back in the back typing, like just kind of like the subtlety and like the way that they place the camera. It's just fantastic. There's one more shot where Woodward's on the phone. I forgot who he's on the phone with, but then you have like the congregation of like reporters around the TV like happening behind him, and then it just kind of disperses. Like it's wonderful, and it's like and like that's one of those things. Like I think what stands out about that, if you kind of want to get into the they don't make movies like this anymore. It's just the staging. It's so well like staged.
Yes.
It's just like it knows where to put the people and the background and the lights, and like it just knows how to like fully capture a picture, um, which I think speaks to kind of like why you respond to it more than like it being like this really flashy, flashily shot affair. And I think Gordon Willis is just so good at that.
I think Zach, you mentioned the at the very end the TV, and then you have like Woodward and Bernstein like kind of like in the deep background sort of, and the thing that's interesting about one thing that's interesting about this movie to me is like it has that kind of like ripped from the headlines. I mean, it's about like the biggest like political story of like the 1970s. It's not like Vietnam, right? In the United States, and it's like constantly using like archival like media footage. You even have that honestly, which I think is like a bad ending. The like teletype like
Oh yeah, the
August
headlines.
1st, 1975. Like I think that's kind of a lousy ending. But like you have all that where it's like the obvious hook of the movie is for people in the people in 1976 to be like, holy crap, we just lived through this. Now we're going to watch it in a movie version. And it has that kind of like really immediate quality to the text. But like weirdly, like the movie feels like it's not removed from that, obviously, but it doesn't have that kind of, it doesn't feel like the kind of movie that was just like, we got to rush this into production to like strike while the iron's hot, even though like it obviously was that. And like compare that to, any number of movies during like the Trump administration that like really seem to be like, we got to make this movie now because like we got to have the Trump connection, that I think have already aged poorly. And like this movie, 50 years, almost 50 years later, despite being like so specifically grounded in like a several months, like, inside, like deep in the weeds, like political moment of like just a few months of the 1970s, like it doesn't have that dated quality to it, to me. I don't know. How do you guys feel about like that sort of element?
I felt the urgency and I felt the necessity for it, but I also like 2024 brain. I'm like, of course it's obvious. Of course it's Nixon. Of course it's, they're like, you're missing the overall. And I'm like, who's overall? Who's in the overall office? Like, my little like conspiracy X-File brain is like pinging on levels that they like cannot comprehend. And
dude, shout out to the X-Files for just ripping off this movie.
I know. With that being said, like I dug into the conspiracy and the surveillance of it, like two sides to the conspiracy. A conspiracy has to be noticed by the party that's being conspired against, I guess, for it to be an established conspiracy. They're also surveilling these people the exact same way that the White House is. So it's like, what side are you on? All of that is just to say that there are other aspects of this movie that still make it feel fresh without being like, yes, I'm in 1976, and yes, I just lived through Watergate, and I have read about it in my history classes. So it's like, there's still something that there's that quality that like keeps it fresh, or various qualities that keep it fresh and alive 50 years later, and still an exceptional piece of news reporting and journalism film.
Yeah, I think that the thing that works is that they focus on the two reporters and like about like, it's more about the process to get it right rather than like, I feel like a lot of the Trump era movies are like, it's like trying to kind of, everybody's taking a shot and it's like trying to get there to take its shot. Like like as if like it has to say something right now, like you were saying, but it also has to like do that. And it's more about like punching Trump than like making a comment of like about like the situation, around it, and like that, I think that's what like Barry like makes it feel much more dated is this one. It's like, we're talking about like, it's about Watergate, and it's about Nixon, and it's about, this period in American political history, but it's also about like the process like that you go through to discover that. It's the same, it's a whole different thing with Spotlight, but it's the same kind of situation. I haven't seen She Said, the Weinstein story movie from a couple of years ago, but that's one that I've heard is described as like, yeah, it becomes just kind of, it becomes obsessed with like seeing the faces and like hitting all the notes that like trigger to the target audience of like very engaged anti-Trump liberals who like that's kind of their whole viewpoint, rather than like really making a comment on like how these reporters got to this story. And like, you don't, it's kind of the whole like, you don't take down, you take down the enterprise by like setting up a case around it and like you letting that destroy it. It's not, you don't just go to the top and slap the king off. And so I think that this movie does a good job of like kind of showing it shows all its work, which as you like after reading the Roger Ebert review, like he didn't totally love, but it's like that's kind of what it's going for. It's not just oh fuck Nixon, let's knock him down. It's more about like no, how did we get to this point, and like how do you make a case that that this is something that's happening that clearly other people aren't seeing. So.
Good movie.
Good movie. I have one thing that I wanted to posit to you guys. What did you guys think about these female reporters in this? Okay, so I just talked about my mom. I think she's a girl. But these female reporters, they are using something that Woodward and Bernstein don't really have, and it sort of feels like they're feminine wiles. Like when they approach that one younger reporter, and he's like, and they're like, could you talk to your ex-man? Could you see if you could, get that information out of him? She's like, don't make me do it. I don't want to. And then she does. And there's this sort of air of like, don't ask me how I got that. And then the older female reporter, who like reveals through pillow talk, like how she got this information. They back her up and say that like, she's a great reporter, but like, it just sort of feels like, okay, so the guy reporters, they have to like pound the pavement, they knock on the doors, and then the female reporters, hey, just tell me anything. I'm a woman. I don't know what it was only like after I finished watching the movie that I was kind of like, hey, wait a minute.
I don't have anything to say about that other than what you already said. Because it's like,
I'm not talking.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I wasn't there at the time, but
it's the era of whiskey in the desks and cigarettes in the newsroom.
Yeah, but I don't know. I am curious, like how the movie is that. So I guess like is that like this was like part and parcel of like being a female in like a male dominated field? Like is it like that sort of like, well, this is just how it was, or is the movie like framing the female reporters in that way as just a marginalization of like their roles in that newsroom? And I would be curious like what those journalists portrayed would have felt about their.
My mom said that like when she came on the scene, like she walks in for her first day, they're like, she's like, hi, I'm Peggy Ricer, I'm the new hire, and they're like typing pulls down the hall, sweetie, and she's like, no, I'm a reporter. Like, they saw a skirt and they're like, beat it, this is hey toots, this is for the real the real reporters. But that was just like something, again, like I had this I have this picture in my mind of what a reporter looks like, and what a newsroom sounds like, and given the sparkling endorsement, I had kind of built this up to be something, and then like I say, by the end of it I was like, I don't feel like that was very flattering of, fellow journalists who are in the exact same newsroom reporting, on stories of the same caliber with what also sounds like plenty more years of experience than these two newer, as you say, green reporters. But alas.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I would say, like, oh, like that's just the 70s, but then you also had like an instance with the Olivia Wilde character in the Richard Jewell Clint Eastwood movie.
That's egregious. That is really egregious.
Where they had her, they had her character, like in the movie, the character, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reporter that she's portraying, like has this affair with this FBI agent played by John Hamm in the movie, and like the reporter's like, that's a completely
that movie's a total like shameless smear job on her for sure. Which is why because like one of the reasons I know that is because I've seen her statements about that movie. I would be interested again, like what are these women who are portrayed in this movie, like, how do they feel about, the only screen time they get is when Woodward and Bernstein are kind of having them, use their like you said, their wiles to
their feminine wiles.
Yeah, it's like, oh.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Yeah. I don't know. The last thing I can say, speaking as the working journalist in the room, um, I will say, counter to the fact that counter to the point that you made earlier, Michael, there is still like journalism like this happening today. Like it's different, you know. Like the thing that's crazy about this one that just you would never do, like, is the fact that, well, one, they have like these green journalists, you know, these like, you know, these really like young journalists who like get to jump on the story, and that story kind of happens because it was just such an afterthought story, and so like, um, of course they would like handle the first rounds of the story, but then the fact that they just like continue to get to keep on the story is crazy. Um, but like, you know, for the most part, like, you know, we have an investigative journalist in our room, and like he kind of works months at a time on stories, and like that's kind of how this stuff works. You know, you wouldn't see that in a lot of different newsrooms because they may not have like an investigative team or investigative reporter who, like, the issue more is like, you know, like there's that the string of scenes where like they're knocking on doors and like checking this roster list of all the people who work at the committee to reelect, and it's like 2 weeks of them just doing that. Like that's what their job is for 2 weeks. And you wouldn't get that. Like there's no way you would spend like 2 weeks just focusing on, hey, like go find all these names and like go knock on doors and figure out what's up. There would be kind of like, all right, like we're gonna need some stories from you sooner or later, and like that's the kind of thing that you know, that seems unrealistic. Is just like this is just their whole thing, that like this is all they get to focus on, and like that was
Is that unrealistic, or was that just how it was back then?
that's unrealistic now. That's just not
Oh,
that's how it
okay,
was back
yeah.
then, because you could hire, like, you had so many people in the room, like stuff was getting covered because you had like hundreds of reporters in there, and so like, yeah, like Woodward and Bernstein could go fuck around for 2 weeks knocking on doors and doing that kind of stuff because stuff was getting covered. And that's just not the case now. But that, like, there's still that type of journalism happening. You know, like New York, it's a lot of it seems is much in much more apparent places. You know, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, the Atlanta Journal Constitution, the Dallas Morning News, like all of these kind of daily papers, and national, and even in big cities, like they're doing all that. They're doing
Knoxville has some
investigations.
investigative reporters. Like I think News Sentinel has at least one, and I think Compass has one as well.
Yeah, and so like, you know, it still happens. It's, you know, it's just the thing about this is that's kind of so silly that, you know, is, well, not silly, but like this is like this big bombshell story. Like it's kind of like you watch this and like I feel like people probably go like, oh, journalism isn't like it was back in the day. They're not doing this stuff, and you're just like, well, yeah, that's like a once in a lifetime story that's happening. Like 99% of people aren't doing that in the
People
profession.
simply aren't meeting with moles from the White House in parking garages anymore. What is the deal?
Yeah, and you're like, yeah, like of course, like of course they're not doing that. They're, you know, they're doing investigations into like local stuff that, you know, if you're that's happening in like Des Moines, Iowa, but if you're in you know, Boston, Massachusetts, you probably don't know about or care about necessarily because it doesn't directly affect you. Um, and so it's, you know, in that realm, it's still happening, and it's just like, again, like the structure of news is just different to a degree. I mean, it's just part of it, you know, not to sit here and belabor on why news is in the situation it is, but it's just like there's a confluence of different issues that's partially on the fault of the newspapers and the people who ran them 30, you know, 25, 30 years ago, partially on like just not identifying changing business models and different modes of information, and three, just also like all of the different modes of information that are accessible now, and like a more democratized flow of information lessens the, like, why would I need to, like, you know, read the Washington Post? Like if this was the Washington Post was doing this in 2024, like, yeah, I could like, I don't need to like get a subscription or like read the Washington Post. I'll just go on Twitter, or, you know, and somebody will probably have tweeted it out or posted somewhere like that. Just, you know, the democratization of information has just kind of soiled that, and that's just more of a, if you want to blame somebody, you can blame Mark Zuckerberg. Probably chief among those.
One of the things that has obviously changed, like while I've been alive, but is like so instantly memory hold, is like the classified ads, and like
Oh yeah,
I guess those used to be a huge cash cow for newspapers, and that's basically gone now. It's wild.
yeah,
I
it's
remember
gone.
my
You got
parents posting
Craigslist.
stuff in the classifieds, and that's no longer there
No, you
for
got
the most part.
Craigslist. You got like
Yeah.
Facebook Marketplace and stuff now. I mean, it's just so like the main crux of it is that newspapers lost their like here you identify the like who owns the modes of information. It's like you got the newspapers who are printing their own papers and can kind of dictate that. You have radios, you got TV, and they're all like dictating like if you need information on the Watergate scandal, you have to go to the Washington Post because they're the only ones covering it. And that's just not the case now. Like, the newspapers have to adhere to adhere to Google and Facebook and Instagram and all these different algorithms that are not set up in order to um, promote promote not just like news but also like local news. It's and also and I think it's also like not just the fault of like those machinations there, but also people like rather than reading a local news story like oh like I'm getting stuck on like a TikTok loop or I got these really cool Cinematary Instagram posts that like I'm really into and I'm just gonna skip out on this local transit story about regional accountability on our transit authority. And that's just kind of like it's a confluence of a bunch of different things. I think overall though it's like things are different than it is in this movie, but at the same time, I think that like the people in the room can be as talented as the ones that you see here, just because I think that drive and that intelligence and determination to like tell stories is still there. It's just tougher to get that information to people who care.
We care. We
And
care on
that's why-
cinematary.com.
And that's why I do my job.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts from y'all before we wrap up? Any other family members who have thoughts on movies, Grace, that you need to involve in the podcast?
Hey, I'm using my resources. I have multiple means of information, and I
gotta say, like, completely wild that like in the last like month or so, Grace has had both her parents like directly involved with things relevant to these movies. Like, how often can you say that? Like, oh yeah, I was a projectionist. My dad was a projectionist who is like a longtime fan of this movie, or my mom worked in the field that this movie.
I'm very fortunate. I am who I come from, and so here I am. I stand before you.
She's a big fan of the post. I see Grace's mom liking all the posts, going, "Awesome, good to see."
She loves them. Yeah, she's a big fan. We're putting out information, news bumps, and so she really enjoys our reporting. Just a family of storytellers.
Thanks, Grace's mom.
Peggy Ricer. That's her byline.
Thanks, Peggy.
Thanks, Peggy. All right. Well, that'll wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on I'm trying to think of the ones that we still use. Go to Instagram at Cinematary. Grace is going to be posting stuff. I mean, this is coming out on Friday, the 29th?
Yeah.
29th 30th of August. And so definitely go to Twitter and Instagram handles at Cinematary. We'll be in TIFF pretty soon. We'll have coverage of TIFF popping up on the Instagram account as well as the Twitter account. You can also find us on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary. We'll be listing the movies that we talked about in this episode there. And go to patreon.com/Cinematary if you'd like to support the show. Thank you to our patrons, Cam, Ron Hayes, Tanner Huskins, Teresa Marsathi, and Tyler Chandler. We appreciate you supporting the show. But next episode, we're going to be shifting over from print journalism for a minute, and we're going to be going over to broadcast journalism with broadcast news from 1987.
Another blast from the past of a
There's one that we'll get some better female representation in that.
Oh, for sure.
Thank goodness.
There's good female representation. I love Rachel McAdams so much in Spotlight. She's good.
Great, yeah.
All right. Until next time. Thanks y'all for listening. We'll see you then.